Well, actually, our efforts at the moment are focused on seeking to support the families of the journalists who have asked for a pardon. So that request has gone to the president of Myanmar, and as we know, the president consults with Aung San Suu Kyi, the country's leader, in deciding whether to grant a pardon. The case is no longer in the courts because, as you know, they've been convicted and sentenced. Under Article 204 of Myanmar's constitution, the president can pardon anyone who's been convicted at any time. They have not committed any crime, so when we say pardon, it's not that they've actually done anything wrong, but this is the only way at the moment for them to be released from prison. So we very much hope that the government will agree to pardon them as a result of the request that they've received from the journalist families.
Sure. Do you agree with Burmese leader Aung San Suu Kyi that their jailings had nothing to do with freedom of expression based on the judgment, and that they were not jailed because they were journalists?
Yes, I mean, sorry, no, not at all. I was just going to say I did hear those remarks that Aung San Suu Kyi made in Hanoi, and I can only, presume that she was misinformed about the case. So today at the event here at the United Nations, I sought to explain why the case is actually a miscarriage of justice, and it's actually very simple. The journalists had documents planted on them, and then police came and arrested them for possessing those documents. Now, as it happens, those documents weren't even secret. They certainly weren't state secrets, but they were arrested and now have been sentenced to 7 years. And the whole trial really was just a way to silence the journalists because they were working on a report about the execution of 10 men in Rakhine State. And it's because of that reporting and because of the story that was eventually published by Reuters that they've been held in prison for this long. And, Aung San Suu Kyi came into office saying it was her priority to release prisoners of conscience. She knows better than anyone what it means to be a political prisoner in Myanmar. And we are appealing to her because of the principles that she has espoused and because of the history of her own life, to actually step in now to this case and remedy the injustice, and in doing so, not only free 2 men, not only put 2 broken families back together, but actually set Myanmar back on the path towards the rule of law and democracy and all the things that she has promised and all the things that the Myanmar people deserve.
What have you uncovered about Rohingya crisis that you wish to highlight as a human rights lawyer?
Well, we've learned about horrific violence, unfortunately. I mean, if you read the piece published in February that was the result of their reporting, it's very difficult to read. You hear about 2 boys, high school age boys, along with 8 older men who were, given their picked out of a crowd on a beach where people were hiding, after days of atrocities committed by the army. You hear about these 10 people being picked out of the crowd saying they were being invited to a meeting and how they were marched up a hill. They were actually given their final meal and then marched up a hill and made to kneel in front of a shallow grave, hacked to death and shot to death. And we know this because the reporters spoke to witnesses, not only from the survivor community, but also from the perpetrators and from Buddhist villagers and others who were eyewitnesses. And everything that they uncovered in that story, and sorry, we also have photographs of the men kneeling in front of the grave and then the bodies inside. So I do encourage you to read the piece, and what we've found is that everything that they said has been confirmed by other sources since then, and crucially, the army itself has not actually sought to deny what happened, and they say that 7 people have been prosecuted for the crimes committed in India that were uncovered by the reporters. These reporters should be given a prize for the work that they're doing as journalists. I mean, they are on the front lines just trying to uncover the truth of what's happening and make sure that people in Myanmar and around the world know what's happening. And they certainly shouldn't be in prison, kept away from their young families. As you've probably seen in covering the trial, Cha Sa-u has a 3-year-old daughter. Yeah. He's only able to touch her during those court proceedings, and it's heartbreaking to see that and to see his family ripped apart. Walone has become a first-time father. since the case started, and he's never met his daughter. So I would hope that, even on humanitarian grounds, the government will now say enough is enough. They should be pardoned. They should be reunited with their families, and other journalists in Myanmar shouldn't have to fear telling the truth and doing good reporting. That should be encouraged. That's what the country needs, and that's what will allow for accountability and a path towards democracy and more prosperity.
The U.S. State Department reports released a report this week saying Myanmar's military waged a well-planned and coordinated campaign of mass killing, gang rapes, and other atrocities against the Rohingya, but it stopped short of describing the crackdown as a genocide or crime against humanity. Do you think there's a legal argument to support groups claiming genocides was indeed committed by the military?
Well, as we know, the most detailed report that's come out has come out from the UN Fact-Finding Commission. They conducted hundreds of interviews with people on the ground and issued a 450-page report, and they say that yes, there is evidence that is consistent with a finding of genocide. What's important is that this now be decided by an independent investigation that leads to an independent court process. So yesterday the UN Human Rights Council voted to establish what they call an independent mechanism, which is basically a team that will put together files of evidence. All that anybody is asking for, I think, is just a truthful recognition of what's happening, a credible investigation, so the continuation of the work of the UN team and others, and then prosecutions where there's evidence to warrant that. So I don't think too much should be read into the characterization of the crimes at this stage. Not all, not all groups necessarily characterize the crimes without there being a court process. But I think everyone agrees that a proper court that respects due process and that's properly constituted should at some stage be holding those who are responsible for the crimes to account.
Regarding to jail writers reporters case, do you have plan to go to Burma anytime soon?
Well, I would love to go to Burma. It's actually been a country I've been wanting to visit for a long time. A country with this that looks really beautiful and with an amazing history, and I would love to go generally, but of course now working on this case, it may become necessary to seek to visit my clients in prison. I know that my colleagues, other lawyers for Reuters, have previously been denied permission to visit the clients in prison, which is a denial of the right to counsel. If the case is not resolved expeditiously, then that's definitely one of the steps that we might need to take. And at that time, I hope that any request to visit the country would be agreed to by the government.
What's your assessments on freedom of expression in Burma, in general?
Well, unfortunately, this Reuters case is not an isolated case, but the outcome of this case, I think, matters for journalists all over the country. You shouldn't be scared to do this interview or to do the work that you do or to cover any story. And as long as you're doing it in line with, your own ethics, then you shouldn't have to fear any kind of negative consequences for that. That's why this case matters, and that's why I think the outcome of the case will tell us a lot about whether Myanmar is actually on a path towards democracy and towards a respect for the rule of law or not. I think this is really the test, and the government will give us the answer soon.
Yeah, as a high-profile human rights lawyer, what's your message to the Burmese journalist community or general public in Burma?
My message is keep doing what you're doing. I think it's been actually really encouraging that on the ground, since the verdict was announced, you've had students go out on the street and protest. I know there's been local media that blacked out their front pages in solidarity with the journalists. I know the Press Council came out and criticized the judgment, and 83 civil society groups came out in Burma and criticized the judgment. That's really important for the journalists to know that they've got that support, and also for the government to know that this is not the Burma that people want it to be, and this is not what they thought was being promised to them when Aung San Suu Kyi came into power.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.